Hey everybody, good morning. Bonjour tout le monde. So the first session today is a panel on Canadian sport, the sports sponsorship landscape. And it'll be facilitated by Dan Thompson. Dan is a former national team athlete from the sport of swimming, gold medalist in the 100-meter butterfly at the 78 and 82 Commonwealth Games, attended 2 World Championships, and was a member of the 1980 boycotted Moscow Olympic team, which that's
okay.
Yeah.
Don't feel sorry. I got around.
That's a rough one.
I got around. It was okay.
Yeah,
this isn't a couch.
To remind you one more time. Dan is also one of the founders of Athletes Can. In company with Ann Peel and a few other passionate national team athletes, they founded the Canadian Athletes Association, today known as Athletes Can. Over a 25-year period, Dan has worked in various marketing capacities, most recently with McLaren McCain Inc., one of Canada's largest integrated marketing firms, where he was president of Momentum, where he led the development of experiential marketing and integrated sponsorship programs for some of Canada's largest corporations. In 2007, Dan joined Canadian Tire Jumpstart Charities as president, and in this capacity used his sport and business acumen to develop a strong brand and successful program delivery system for Canadian Tire Jumpstart. And with that, I hand it over to Dan.
Great. Oh, I think I've got a... put that we'll put that down later for questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about sponsorship. I'm going to introduce one at a time once I say a few words, our panel, but I'd like to just mention we've got Mark Harrison, who's the president of Trojan One, Bernie Cernan, who's the CEO of the Cernan Group, and Michelle Como, who's I got it here. Hang on, I'll get it right. The senior consultant for Agenda Sports Marketing. And then we're going to have Chris Matruk. Did I get that right? Not really. But he's going to join us later. He's with the Cernan Group to answer some questions. Okay, so let's talk about sponsorship. And I think sponsorship has evolved since back in the 70s when most of you weren't born, but that's when Abby Hoffman and Bruce Kidd and Bruce Simpson and other athletes went to talk to Mark Lalonde about support for the 76 games, and out of that came Game Plan, and out of that came AEP. And that was sort of the first foray into getting active support for athletes. And there's been a real paradigm shift in the sponsorship business. In the 70s, it was really all about donations. And it was very emotional. So it was the CEO deciding that he wanted to support ballet or opera or motorsport or whatever was really tickled his fancy, his or her fancy. And it was very much emotional, and there wasn't a lot of ROI. There wasn't a lot of return. If athletes were involved, they were probably involved in terms of athlete appearances, and they really weren't. There was no two-way relationship in that respect. In the 80s, we got into more traditional sponsorship. And suddenly, middle management became accountable for ROI. So the CEO couldn't go to the director of marketing and say, okay, we're going to do this. He had to have some ROI. There had to be some value. And these were the big, heady days of sponsorship when you had F1, big motorsport sponsorships. It was all about awareness and image. And again, athletes were starting to be used a little more, but they were used at trade shows, employee events, retail appearances, but it really wasn't an integrated program. By the 90s, we were into that whole phase of what we call event marketing or associative marketing, where it's all about doing fewer, bigger sponsorship and having an associative relationship with a particular property. So it's your love for hockey and transforming that love for hockey into a sponsorship and putting a whole series of integrated elements around sponsorship. So this is when the whole notion of consultative sales happened, when property owners or athletes couldn't go in and just simply say, oh, well, I'm here, I need some help. You had to learn a little bit about their business. You had to be very two-way interactive, and corporations respected that. You had to help them develop integrated programs that made sense for them. And we're starting to tap into multiple budgets. It was not just the marketing budget. There were business development budgets. There was an employee training budget. So if you were a sophisticated marketer, you had to go and figure out where the pots of money were in a corporation and try and house them and try and create programs around them. Now we're getting, and athletes were used a little more. They were used for the faces of promotions like the General Mills cereal promotions of the world. And we were starting to get into sponsorships where experiences were important. So we were creating experiences that money can't buy. And I remember when I was back working in the sponsorship industry, we created the Wayne Gretzky Future Stars program, which was a camp where a series of camps across the nation, which culminated in a hockey camp with Wayne Gretzky. So you know, those are the examples where it was using the fame and that sort of intangible experience of being an athlete and making it relevant to consumers. Now in the 2000s, I think we're into what you've heard the buzzword experiential marketing, where consumers want two-way dialogue, and they want to you can't do more than just be there. You've got to create an experience for their product. So we've really grown these at this point. They need to be programs need to be fully integrated using all sorts of different communication mechanisms, whether it be TV, public relations, direct marketing. It was a full service integrated approach. And like anything, if the athlete was part of that mix, there had to be ROI that was delivered from that experience. And also and I think we see this more and more, that social responsibility is creeping into the mix, and the corporations are being forced to do more things, not forced, but consumers are wanting to do more things that are relevant at a community level. So getting athletes involved and endorsed celebrities in community-based programs is becoming a part of the marketing mix. Now, Athletes Can here has a long history of looking at sponsorship. Back in the first forum, I think I directed a session much like this, and we had the director of marketing for Reebok, and he got up and talked a little bit about, from a channel point of view, talked about how athletes can be used in the channels with the Foot Lockers of the world and the mass retailers in the sporting goods industry. We had a session much like this talking about trends in sponsorship and where it was going and how athletes could get involved. And then I think it was 92, 93, somewhere in there, Cheryl Boyle, a whitewater kayaker, wrote a great book. And if you haven't read it, you should read it because it's so relevant even today, called Partners in Sport, The Athlete's Guide to Funding Sponsorship and it was actually in 1992. And that was a great little document. It's sort of more at a local, regional level of how athletes can find sponsorship, and it creates a whole series of checklists of how to go through and identify your goals, your needs, and try and match those with those of a relevant sponsor. Again, 96, Ashley gave me a whole bunch of stuff to read, and there was a great deck done on athlete and sponsorship, a corporate overview. It's very IMG-ish. It talks a lot about the role of sponsorship, the role of integrated communication, and the role that athletes can play in that. And I guess, and as well, I read a great little piece by Jason Krause that talks to fundraise $50,000, and that's something that I guess, Jason, you did in 2007. So there's a great history, and while much has changed, a lot has stayed the same. And so I don't think we're in a question of reinventing the wheel. We're just in a way of looking at this that is more effective for you, the athletes. So corporations are involved in sponsorships for essentially three reasons. And whether you're at the national sponsorship level or a local level, they're pretty much the same. It's either sales, they want to sell more stuff, they want to develop image, they want to shape or retain perception of them as a company or as an entity, and they want to build relationships, and whether that's internal or external relationships. Now, before we get in to introduce the panels, I want to just talk about a few trends that are out there. Certainly, corporations are being more careful about their investments. ROI and risk are an important part of the vocabulary. And I think I've sort of demonstrated that by the evolution of the sponsorship industry. Certainly risk is a big part, and we can't, there are some great examples. The Tiger Woods example is a great example where corporations have to be very careful about the relationships they get in, and they've got to manage those risks. All sponsorships need to be customized based on the buyer's motivations. And this is somewhat different local, regional, and national. I think as we talk today, we need to you're just going to stick your hand up and ask a question, I think we better figure out what context. Is it local, region, or national? Because it's a very different discussion, I think, at that point. But I think that the trend here is that as we're getting more customized, that these sponsorships are having to be more focused, and they're having to be more integrated. And I think that's the important point. And you got to learn. It's give and take. You got to learn about the requirement of that particular sponsor. Now, the third one I would say is that social responsibility is creeping into the conversation more and more. And corporations and athletes want to be involved with programs that make a difference and give back to the community. And you can just see that in general communication, and a lot of the research we do with the charity I'm involved in now, is consumers, they kind of get it at 60,000 feet, but they don't get it at the community level. So I think that's a real opportunity for sponsorship to be really relevant at a community level. The last thing that I just thought of, I was listening to some of the conversation last night, and is that I think athlete sponsorship is still very tactical, and that corporations are not aligned necessarily against the OTP strategy. And so it'd be an interesting discussion, maybe not in this session, but things like how does it link to OTP and the long-term development model? We've got all these opportunities for money out there, whether it be through the Athlete Can Fund, investors, Petro-Canada, GM Dreams program, RBC Olympians, and the Rona Athlete program. But are they aligned? Are they helping us as a nation maximize our abilities on the world stage? Not so sure, and I think there's some work to do there. Okay, now on to our panelists. First up, I'd like to introduce Mark Harrison, and we're really lucky to have Mark here. He's the president of Trojan One. He's one of Canada's leading sponsorship marketers, for sure. He was voted the most influential marketer by Sport Decision magazine. He holds an MBA from York University in entrepreneurship and strategic planning. He formed Trojan Sports Marketing in 1994, and then he's expanded it since to a full-service marketing agency. So what he does is he creates ownable sport properties, such as he was the mind behind the Participation Sport Day in Canada, and recently he's been working with Canadian Tire to develop the Canadian Tire Hockey School concept and the sponsorship with Jonathan Toews, which led into a 5-year relationship with the NHL. Mark founded the Canadian Sponsorship Forum, and if you ever get in the sponsorship industry and you ever get a chance to go to a forum, go to this one. It's really good. And what he does is he teams it up with major properties. So, for example, next year I think it's around the F1. So it creates a great milieu between an actual live event to see how it works and all the sponsorship executives coming together to learn about it. And amongst other endeavors, he's very much involved in sport and coaches a local high school football team. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mark, who's going to talk about what corporations, what sponsors want, what corporations want, and we'll leave it at that and let you go.
Well, thanks, Dan. My number one disclosure, although in this audience it's probably less concerning, but always people are a little worried being in a hotel being presented to by a guy from Trojan. But since you're young enough that probably you're still in the target market, my high school sports teams were the Trojans, so you can do the math. That's how we became Trojan Sports Marketing. And in fact, it's high school when I got into this business, quite frankly. I was 15 years old, playing on a city football team in Orillia, Ontario. We go to Ottawa, we go to Toronto. They had better helmets, they had better uniforms. In fact, our team was red and white, but I had a green helmet and a big Michael Jackson at the time, so my helmet was huge. I was the quarterback. The other teams called me Gazoo. It was really humiliating. So I told our coach, who if you're from Toronto, our coach resembles the new Toronto mayor, sort of square. And I said, you got to get us a sponsor. So he went to his favorite local business, which was Kentucky Fried Chicken. A week later, we had new uniforms, but he sold our soul. Instead of our numbers on the front, we now had a picture of Colonel Sanders. So not only was I Gazoo, but I was now the chicken. And I got to tell you, at 15, I decided I had to do something about it. So some of that story is true, some of it's a bit stretched. But as Dan mentioned, did start Trojan in 1994, and over the years, we've kind of come to the conclusion there's sort of 5 things that sponsors want. And sometimes I do this speech in 3 hours, and today I'm going to do it in 3 minutes. And my punchline is always, if you had 5 pages or 5 sentences to ask a sponsor I would cover off these 5 things, and I'll try to do it crisply, and we can talk about it later. The first thing a sponsor wants is to borrow equity. To me, that's the definition of sponsorship. And each and every one of you as athletes, or I say this to associations, we work with people like Volleyball Canada and Athletics Alberta, you've got to define your equity. What do you stand for? And you have to think of yourself as a brand, as an individual athlete, and because corporations want to borrow some of that equity. So Participaction is one of my clients, and they're dead clear that they want to make Canadians the most physically active people in the world. Pretty simple message, easy to communicate to a sponsor. The second thing is sponsors want to tell stories. Marketing is storytelling. As you sat back and listened to Dan talk about the evolution of sponsorship, you can see how storytelling has become part of the picture. I don't work with Tim Hortons, but I love to use this analogy. Timbits is not a hockey sponsorship. Timbits is not a soccer sponsorship. It's a story about being Canadian. And when your son or daughter goes on the ice for the first time or plays soccer for the first time and you have that moment, that's a quintessential Canadian moment. You look at their advertising, it backs up. So it's not about the sport, it's about the story they want to tell. So if you're approaching a sponsor, you're thinking, what equity of yours can you offer them? Who are you as an individual? And what story can they help tell? The third thing is they want to engage stakeholders. So in some cases, those stakeholders are employees. In some cases, they're media. With Participaction and Sports Day in Canada, we helped generate 57 million media impressions. What does that mean? That means $3 million in marketing value. I could tell you that project costs much, much less than $3 million. We work with Nike. We've got a high school running program going on right now. Nike's focusing on high school athletes as the future. So literally, we've got a crew going around to cross-country meets all across Ontario, engaging youth, signing them up for this new website, letting them try out Nike product. Those are the measurables that they're looking for. Fourth thing sponsors want is proof. And there's 2 types of proof. They want business proof, business impact, and they want societal impact. I know sometimes outside looking in at big corporations, you think they're only concerned about the bottom line. I can tell you that when a company spends $1,000 or $100,000 or $1 million, bosses are saying, but did we do any good? Because it's not just about selling one more case or product. And the last thing, and it's going to sound a little odd, is sponsors want to get promoted. And I don't mean the company, I mean the individual. Our agency, we have 45 full-time employees in Vancouver, Calgary, Montreal, and Toronto, and Mississauga, but I call that Toronto. And our mission statement is very simple. It's to get our clients promoted. I don't mean Canadian Tire, I mean Cindy Graham. Cindy Graham is the woman that sits across from me at Canadian Tire. She's the strategic marketing manager. Everything I do for her, I do for her boss. So if you're talking to somebody about a sponsorship, think about who they report to. They might be somebody who owns a local real estate company, but they still have people that in their minds that they've got to appeal to. If they work for an organization, find out who their boss is. And I'll give you a very simple example, and then I'll be quiet. Years ago, I was talking to one of my clients. I said, why is it every time you sponsor a a tournament, you want to have an ad in the program? Like, does that ad really get any exposure? And she told me, my boss doesn't go to the events. So when I come back from the event, I hand them the program and I say, this is what we did. So those are the 5 things that Trojan One thinks sponsors want.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Okay, let's move on, and then we'll come back for questions once we've heard from everyone. So it's next my pleasure to introduce Bernie Cernan, who's the CEO of the Cernan Group. And not only, of course, is Bernie an Olympic champion, but has also captured 4 World Championship medals and remains the current Canadian record holder over 100 meters and over 160 meters indoors. He also, which I found very interesting, is still running and is very involved in masters level competition and holds the Canadian record for the 40 to 45 age group. You don't look 45.
40 plus. 42, 45.
And his ultimate goal, and it's good after listening to Shanna last night, he's still got goals, which is great, is to have the world record in the 60 meter at, which is I think it's 6.78. So best of luck on that one. No problem, I'm sure. He also runs the Cernan Foundation, which aims to promote sports and fitness to children. He also promotes and sells Cernan supplements and Cernan clothing. And while running a sports management company and marketing firm that represents many of Canada's top athletes. So Bernie was recently named as the president of Quebec Athletics Association and is a board member of Athletics Canada and named to the Canadian Olympic Sports Hall of Fame. So it's a great pleasure to have Bernie here today, and he's going to talk a little bit about what does the athlete have to offer. So Bernie.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for it's good to be here with you guys. I mean, you all are athletes. I mean, you have to consider yourself when you're going to approach a company. You have to consider yourself as a product. It's maybe bad to say, but in reality, it's that. And yourself, you have to consider yourself as a brand. You have to be successful. You have to develop that brand. You need to have a clean image, your personality. A lot of time when you see media, talking to media, try to have a relationship with the media, and that also can help you promote yourself, because better you know, better you do social activity, you involve in your environment, like people are gonna recognize you. Better you have chance to have a sponsor. Today we talk a lot about social media. So to me, social media is you have to get it. I mean, if we're talking about Facebook or Twitter, I mean, the more and more your name is out there, the more and more you talk about your story, your result when you go compete, the more and more people or sponsor can be interested in yourself. One thing you have to be careful on the social media also, especially in Facebook. You have to know when you do your private. I mean, sometimes if you go to party, example, you have to be careful. You always have to have a clean image, because I don't think that if you represent a company, like the CEO would like to see you like party like an animal in the club. I mean, that's because
they weren't listening to you last night. I just want to go on the record right now. I had to walk out.
Oh, that's an exception. We're gonna take that away. One thing is because actually I had somebody I know. I'm not going to say the name, because she was representing like a big company, but that person liked to party. And when the boss of the company found out that, he said, "Well, that's not our image. You represent us. You represent our value. I mean, that's not why we hired you for." And unfortunately, they cut the contract. So you have to be very careful about that. When you approach potential sponsors, you need to have a well-developed portfolio. When you're gonna have to put in that your results, your goals, what kind of training you do. And of course, if you put all your overall expenses to say, well, the company, this is the amount that I would like, this is my training expense, that would help your case to have a press book. And also, if you happen to have a contract or a company that approach you, you have to be aware of the kind of contract they're gonna offer you. First of all, you have to say, if a company approach you, are you comfortable also on your side to represent that company? What are their values? If you're comfortable with that, go ahead. You need to be careful on the terms. Are you going to be associated with that company for 1 year, for 3 years, for 5 years, for 10 years? Very careful about that. And the exclusivity also. I mean, if you sign with them, are they going to say, well, you're going to represent only us and no other company? That is very important. What can you do for the company? Sometimes I hear that, well, what do you have to offer? I mean, it's easy. The company, more and more you're going to tell the marketing session, your story, your goals. You can talk to the employees, have autograph session. That's something they are very sensitive to that. If you are comfortable to do conference, motivational conference, that's also one thing that can be very good. One story I want to tell you, when I said when you approach the sponsor to be ready to have your portfolio. Like I said, it's a business, it's a brand. I remember a couple of days ago, it's not an athlete, but it's a business side. Somebody approached me to present a project. The person came with a kind of paper written by hands and scratch, present that to me. I was like, this is not professional. That was my first reaction. I'm like, this person is not serious. And he came with a computer, no battery. He said, okay, hold on a second, I'm going to go away to, I mean, when you approach, you have to be on the target. You are a product. Everything has to be very clean. That's the advice that I would give you.
Yep, that's good. That makes a lot of sense. You've really got to present yourselves professionally and be really clear on who you are and what your brand stands for. So I'd now like to introduce Michelle Colombe, who's the senior consultant for Agenda Sports Marketing out of Calgary. And beyond being, I think, the first employee of Athletes Can way back in the time tunnel, which
you were
is
the vice chair.
And yeah, that's right. That was a few years ago. It's all good. She really is a seasoned sponsorship marketer. Michelle spent 5 years with IMG, doing both working on the property side and working on the consultancy side, working with such properties as the PGA and LPGA, and working with such companies as Nike Canada and McDonald's and TELUS and Panasonic, IBM, and General Motors. Then after leaving IMG, Michelle spent 2 years with Alpine Canada managing the day-to-day corporate partner relationships and servicing the National Sport Federation sponsors. So it's got some good experience on the consulting side and then on the property side. She's been to lots of games, 4 Olympic Games, 2 Pan Am Games, 3 Canada Games, and various other national and international sporting events, and certainly has a passion for Olympic and amateur sport. Currently is the senior consultant and works in business development and corporate consulting, providing her expertise and relationship approach to corporate clients and athlete management. So Michelle's going to talk a little bit about building the relationship, leveraging your brand, and creating an activation program for athletes.
Thanks, Dan. And thanks for having me back. It's been a few years since I was at the forum, so it's kind of nice to be back here and in front of a bunch of new, fresh faces that are out there ready to change the world of sport and sponsorship. So we've talked about the brand, and we've talked about the importance of a story. And, you know, your story is not just your athletic accomplishments and your achievements and your goals, but it's you as a person on and off the field, in and out of the pool, and what that story can bring and how it can tie into a company. It's those companies that are out there that are looking for internal corporate culture building, you know, engaging their athletes and the athletes with their employees. It's not just about that logo that, you know, Dan did the chronological order of how the evolution of sport has happened. And you know, you've got companies now that are not making decisions based on what their CEO at a national level wants to be involved with. It's those companies now that are looking at it going, what can I do for my employees, and how can I sell my employees that this is a good idea? And that's where the athletes come in, where they can engage with the story that you have, that only you have. And those are very important. On the brand, your brand is you, and being professional is exactly what Dan and Bruni and Mark have all said, is how you approach your sport is how you should approach the business of sport. And, you know, you're looking for sponsorship, and you need to look at it as just another thing that you need to do as an athlete. You've got your team behind the team, which is your coaches, your sports psychologists, your nutritionists, your parents, your family, and your corporate partners also become that support group behind you, because that's what you need, and that's what's important to the companies out there as well. You're moving a little bit away from return on investment to return on relationship. We hear that a lot when we're working with different companies. They're not just investing in an athlete, they're investing in the relationship with that athlete. And you need to keep that in mind and know that it's more than just business. It can become personal, and they become friends. We've got an athlete that I've been working with who has a local sponsorship in Vancouver, and it's a tofu company, and the grandfather started the business in his kitchen, and he decided that this is what he wanted to do, and after 20 years of trying to create this business, he aligned with an athlete, and they support this athlete over and over, year after year, through success, through not success, but it's because that athlete embodies the family values that company started on. And it's not, the big multinational company, but it's a local sponsorship that, the athlete met the family and goes to community events, goes to family barbecues, and engages with their employees. And that's what's important to that company, and it's not what's important to every company. But at all different levels, you'll find that there are ways that you can get in front of companies at all levels to figure out what's the best fit for you. It's not going into the international companies if you're not prepared for what those obligations might look like. Everybody knows that you bring great competitive advantages and perspective, and companies are looking for that. The big thing that I think that athletes need to consider as well in building that relationship is that there are going to be times when you need to align yourself with a charitable cause or do some stuff for free, and it's those different events like the school day that you did the other day that you don't really know whose kid is going to go home and talk to their father or tell them what a great day it was and who they met and what it was. And then, we see a lot of relationships come out of those meetings when those kids go home, and then their parents find out about someone that happened to be local within their community, and potentially get a relationship out of it, or a phone call to your federation, or different things like that, because you are your biggest salesperson. You can go out there, you can hire the best agency out there, you can think that you've got the top story and all that kind of stuff, but if you can't sell yourself to that company, even the best salesperson would have a hard time selling you. So you need to remember that you really are your best salesperson out there, and what we're here to do today is help give you the tools to be able to go out there and build the best portfolio and have the best pitch and create the biggest and best public awareness campaign so that you are able to tell your story, use your strength to build your brand, to get those sponsors. So
great, thanks so much. Okay, now I think let's open it up for questionings, and let's make sure your questions are as directed and targeted as they can be. In terms of whether is this question, how is it relevant? Is it local? Is it regional? Is it national? Is it an international setting? And I think this session will only be as good as the questions that we get and the challenges that you have for our group here. So I can start it off if you wish, but does anyone have any questions?
Brian Johns from swimming. Pardon me. Just talked about developing your own story and being able to sell that to a future partner. I was wondering if you can give us a little bit of maybe some practical and specific items that we can use in order to build our own image in order to sell it to somebody. Like what specific things would we need in order that would be best to portray our story to a future partner?
That's sort of what my workshop's going to be on after this. I think there's a few of us actually talking about the portfolio, but I've actually got a work page that you're going to get for the next session. So, and it outlines an entire list of like 30 different things that will help you build your brand. So if we can maybe defer that, if that's okay.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment on that? Okay, any other? Okay. Oh, okay.
Marie-André Lessard, beach volleyball. It's more a comment rather than a question. When I went and met with Jean Gosselin, who's at the national PR firm, I don't know if you guys know this firm, I showed up with my budget and told him how much I needed, and this is what it costs. And he said for professional or for big time sponsorships, they don't need to know how much it costs you. You just need to put a value on what you can offer. If you're going for something like charitable or people that are going to support you more charity-wise, I'd say, then you can show more your expenses because then they're helping you filling out your expenses. But definitely he was saying, put that out. You don't need to know this, and you can make money. It doesn't need to just cover your expenses.
I think with that value, though, is you need to legitimize what that value is that you're asking for. So if in your portfolio you can build in the benefits that you have to offer that company, then it will a lot be able to justify the value that you're going in to ask for.
Your comment. Okay.
Alec Denies from Archery. I guess we have lots and lots of stories during our careers, and I just wonder what makes a good story to sell to a sponsor.
Yeah.
Marie?
What makes a good story?
Yeah. How do you pick which one?
I mean, the way I look at it is how you're going to sell yourself, basically. I mean, you can have two different stories. It's just the way that you're going to pitch it. I guess the way you're gonna sell it yourself. It's not. I'm not saying that that it's easy to sell to. Let's say myself. I don't want to talk about me. But I mean, the first time I went to see a sponsor, that was I just came back. I was third at Commonwealth back in 1990. My portfolio was ready. I was so nervous, and I just came clear. I said, okay, well, this is my story. To achieve my goal, I need to go in the United States to have training camp. Because in Quebec, I mean, in my sport, to run 100 meters, there's no place I can train. I need to go to the States. I have no money. I need help. This is my goals. And your company, it's family value. My values are the same as you guys. And this is it. Think about it. The same night, I got a phone call. Yes, we sponsor you. I guess it's just you have to be truthful to yourself, and I think that when the company sees that, and they're gonna be sensitive to that, and it's gonna work. And you have to believe that it's gonna work too. I mean, when I went with my portfolio, I said I'm gonna go there. I'm nervous, but I want it. This is my story, and it worked out. But sometimes it's not easy, but you have to sell yourself. That's what I'm saying, that you guys are a product. I don't know.
Mark?
Sure, I'll jump in, and this is somewhat related to the earlier question about how do you build your story. And since I won't be in your session, Michelle, I'll throw a couple of comments in. But one of the things that our company recently is very fortunate. Dan mentioned how our conference is involved every year with an event. So this past winter, we were actually part of the Paralympics. It was great. We were there the last 3 days. And I have to tell you that exposing 200 people from corporate Canada to that property was a very enlightening experience for them. And the Canadian Paralympic Committee actually hired us after that, and we've just finished developing for them a new sponsorship strategy, which I have a sister company that's now going to be going out and selling. And next week, we're going to present what being a sponsor of the Canadian Paralympic Committee means to their current sponsors in Toronto on November 9th. And I guess where I'm getting to is some people look at things like Paralympics and they're not sure whether it's cause, if it's high performance sport, if it's mixture. It's a very complex story. And I think something like the Canadian Paralympic Committee and Paralympians have a bit of an advantage in that you can actually tailor that story. And I guess my answer would be you need to tailor your story. I personally, as an individual, I tell everybody that I meet that my sole mission in life is to get individuals promoted. So if you're an intern for me, I'm trying to help you become a better sports marketer. You know, I was a prof at Lawrence University part-time for 3 years. I was trying to help them develop. Each of you needs to understand, like, who are you? So beyond just the story of I'm trying to climb a mountain or I'm trying to win medals, are you a team builder? Are you a facilitator? Are you a resourceful person? I think you think about how many athletes there are. You have to go deeper. And my advice to you is you probably have a couple of different angles. And the place that I would focus in on is what does the company need your story to be? I never go into a client, even though I talk a lot, talking endlessly about Trojan One. I go into a client looking for one thing, and that is, what is their pain? What is their problem? What is keeping them up at night? And so I do a lot of work in the charitable sector, and I kind of get booed when I make this little speech, but I tell them, put away your video where you're trying to get people to cry, because I can close my eyes and I've seen that video 100 times, and up comes Next Charity's logo. They're all the same video. Somebody's getting really rich making those videos, right? Kids, sick people, devastation. And I was in Holland last year doing a 2-day workshop with charities from around the world, and we spent 2 days talking about, how do you find a company's pain? What is their problem? So if you're the tofu maker, is it, you know what, we're not getting credit, we're not getting exposure, or we don't have a big marketing budget, or I'm trying to get listed at Safeway, and Safeway won't listen to me. So my advice to you, and I apologize it's a bit long-winded, is tailor your story to them as opposed to you, because each of you have multiple stories. Ahead of time, think of the 2 or 3 things that make you different, but listen to them. Ask questions, and then build your conversation around what their pain is, because you know what? They have the checkbook, so solve their problem.
And I think that's, yeah, I'd just like to say that I think that's a really good comment. I was going to build on that by saying, when I talked about consultative selling, we've got to move from one-way to two-way dialogue, and so you've got to understand what their needs are. I spent 20 years in the sponsorship industry myself, and I was the guy that had to say no. And it's very easy to say no when someone doesn't really understand your business or understand what your pain is, as Mark says. So I think that's good advice.
Yeah, and like, you know, I think this was mentioned earlier too, is your portfolio is an evolving document. It's not the same document for every single company that you go see. It completely changes based on what their pain is, what their objectives are, and what level of company it is. So you can't go in looking for the top dollar when you're going into the local store.
Yep. Oh, sorry.
Philippe Gagnon, retired swimmer. I've got a question regarding the market. Is the Canadian corporation willing to sponsor amateur sport when hockey is so important in Canada? That's my big question.
I think, you know, there's no better time in sport right now with the profile of sport from the Vancouver Games. What we're seeing, though, in the marketplace, and Mark might talk to this a little bit too, is that the $1 million expectations that were set by the media before the games are still those $1 million expectations that are in the media, but they're not the reality that's out there in corporate Canada right now for the sports sponsorship when it comes to amateur sport. You're seeing a lot of companies that probably don't have the money that they think they need to be involved in sport. And I think it's our role to go out there and educate these companies that it doesn't cost you $1 million to get involved in amateur sport with amateur athletes, with national sport federations, provincial sport federations. There are ways to fit sponsorship into your budgets, whether it's through your business development, your advertising budgets, your marketing budgets. And I just think what's happened is everyone thinks that they need to pay the big dollars to get involved, and that there are ways that we need to educate them that you don't have to pay that kind of money.
Yeah, totally agree. And companies are seeing research from consumers that say, you know what, it's more meaningful for you to do something on a community level, grassroots level, than it is to help somebody playing for the Vancouver Canucks, because they're already making millions of dollars. But again, it's not an easy thing, and it's an education process. So, but it's definitely out there. The good news is we've run a sponsorship study for 4 years. Dr. Norma Riley conducts it for us. Sponsorship in Canada has gone up every year for the last 4 years, and it's continuing to.
And I'll just add to that. And if I got the book right, The Long Tail? The Long Tail? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a cool book that really talks about the need to create communities. So if you're an emerging sport or a sport that doesn't have the raw numbers of hockey or the emotional appeal, you've got to create a community, and you've got to be able to have relevancy with as broad a community as you can. So if it's swimming, you've got to represent more than the 35,000 swimmers. You've got to represent the 1.9 million Canadians that take swimming lessons each year. And you and your sports have to try and broaden that community and create a relationship with those members or those that love your sport. And I think that's something that's why the athlete and the NSO have to work very closely together, because we have to create those communities. And the larger the community we can create, the more attractive we'll be for sponsors.
Can I just jump on your swimming comment? So you and I and Pierre had lunch, Pierre Lafontaine, lunch a few months ago. And so I think the swimming is a great example. If you go and talk to companies about sponsoring swimming, there's some interest level from a sport. But, Pierre Lafontaine's comment is, swimming is about saving lives. Like, if you can't swim, you die. Go to a company and talk about, I'm going to run a swimming program that's about helping kids live. That's a completely different conversation.
And it's interesting that swimming has just done a MOU with the Red Cross, because we're trying to expand our reach into communities and be relevant to the average mom and dad that has a child and wants to ensure that that child is safe around water. Memorandum of Understanding. So that's if you have a relationship between two properties. Okay.
I had a question about, I guess it's a little bit about the context we were talking about. If you're talking about regional, provincial, national type of sponsorships for an athlete, from your perspective, if you could elaborate on when do you think it's appropriate for an athlete to approach an agent or to utilize an agent, and essentially how big of a draw do you need to be before it's time to look at using an agency to help find some sponsorship, and what that process looks like a little bit.
I think it might defer to Bernie and Michelle, because they're in that direct business. So why don't we?
When it will be a good time to have an agent. I mean, to me, maybe it's different to Michelle. I mean, I don't think you need an agent if you're not an, let's say, international level. I mean, those things like local, you can go knock on doors. I mean, a lot of time I've talked to athletes, and they say that, well, it's tough to have sponsors and stuff like that. I said, well, how many companies you want to see? Or, well, a lot of time I'm surprised they haven't even started yet, because they heard it's tough. They don't go. They think that a company is gonna come and calling you. Don't wait on because they're not gonna call you. If you guys, well, anyone think that, they're not gonna call you. I mean, you have to go knock on doors. Sometimes it can be 2,000, 5,000, but it's like that you grow. And like I said before, more and more you develop that relationship, you perform, they see your face, and the media locally, you grow up, and after that you can ask for higher numbers. But before that, you can do it by yourself.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Bernie. We get a lot of calls in our office, and I've dealt with athletes as an agent for 10, 12 years, and the first question I always ask when an athlete says, well, I think I need an agent, my first question is always like, why? Like, why do you think you need an agent? And again, like Bruni said, is a lot of times when you start those dialogues and it makes you sort of start thinking, well, I need sponsorship, is usually the response. And when you find out that that person hasn't actually gone out there and tried to actually sell themselves, then it's pretty hard to think that someone who doesn't know you as well as you know yourself is going to be able to sell you better. Where I've seen different athletes come on board is, it's the athletes that are going into a World Cup season as a top, junior, transitioning over to the senior level, going out there, starting to win on a senior level, with an upcoming Olympics, with some contracts pending and stuff like that. But there's companies like Bruni's company, what we do at Agenda. If you have a question about a contract, there's a lot of people out there that'll review contracts for you for nothing. And then you're not stuck paying the 15, 20% based on, a $5,000 deal or whatever, because the deals out there for a lot of amateur athletes aren't in the range where you actually think you should be paying someone 20% for a deal that you've actually done yourself. So I think you just really need to look at that, and there are people out there in Resources, Sports Solution, different people to help you go through the whole contractual side, because that does get intimidating. And when you're starting to figure out what is my value, and how does what I ask for affect everyone else in my sport when they go out and ask for that as well. There's always those issues, because the minute an athlete goes and does something free for a company, you devalue every other athlete that might want to also approach that company, because if they know they can get it for free, then why would they pay someone else for that?
You know, one comment from me, I remember having a conversation with Ken Reed way back, 1980, 81, and I was blown away by how sophisticated he was and how he understood the sponsorship marketplace and how he was taking a business approach to his career. Now that was survival, because in that world, unless you have the right skis, the right equipment, the right training, you can't make it. So you've got to become pretty sophisticated. So a little bit, I think, for you guys depends on, okay, I want to be the best in the world. I got so many hours I got to spend to train and to get there. What can I afford the time? It's a lot of work. Don't kid yourself. Sponsorship is a lot of work, even if it's at a local level. Am I prepared to put that work in? Is it going to get me to my goal, or am I going to rely on AEP and other funds through the NSO, etc.? So it kind of gets personal to me. Like you gotta say, okay, this is my goal, this is my dream. In order to get there, I need X, and I'm prepared to do Y. So I think you gotta put that in the mix too, because don't think that. And I say this to people who want to get in the sponsorship industry. I mean, it appears to be a very glamorous business, but it's not, and it's a lot of hard work. And finding sponsors is hard work. It's not as difficult as you might think, but you need to be engaged. And I guess I'd like to ask a question back to the panel, which is, how involved does the athlete need to be in the selling process? And actually, and I guess that's more when you're looking at it from a local perspective, a local or regional perspective. If you're a national, international athlete and you've got that, you know, you're top 8 in the world like Bruni's talking about, then maybe there's a different route working with an agent. But for most of us, that's not the case. So how involved does the athlete need to be in the process?
You know, Agenda had 6 Olympic gold medalists at these last games, and in every conversation that we have with any potential sponsor that's out there, the athlete is usually the one that makes that first contact, because it's someone that they've met in their travels, at a conference, at a trade show, at a hospitality suite from the Olympics, whatever. These athletes are that first point of contact, and they're having that initial conversation. They're giving us the information back at the agency. We follow up with them. And then if there's the potential that we've got a meeting set up, the athlete's at that meeting. It's the best way to do it, and you see the greatest results that way.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on. Yep. You gotta have the mic. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Talking about getting to know the pain of the corporation or the company that you're looking to sponsor. In that conversation, and when you get that, you find out what their pain is or what their struggle or challenge is. Is it more about creating a connection, so telling your story in a way that reflects how you face that same struggle, or is it more about problem solving and how what you bring to the company is going to help fix that problem if possible? Is it sort of more one or the other, or is it kind of a mixture of both?
Yeah, well, I think that's the challenge, right? So I don't know anything about your athlete and the tofu maker, but I'm going to go back to my Safeway example. If you're having that conversation and the owner is saying, I can't get listed at Safeway, you then take what you can do and put it in that context. Well, we could do a program. I could go and do tours at Safeway, or I could do clinics, or, you know what, let me go find out what's important to Safeway and come back and have that conversation. And a lot of people say to me, well, it's difficult sometimes to find out the pain, but trust me, asking questions is it's remarkably eye-opening. And you know, the other thing I love to tell people is, if you know that that tofu maker is the person that you really want to be your sponsor, and there's 3 other tofu makers, go have conversations with them first. Learn everything you can about tofu, and then by the time you get to the meeting you want to have, you'll ask amazing questions.
Good advice. Who's got the mic? Okay.
1 minute. There we go. We have about 20 minutes left, so we got a bit of time. It's here, there. That's our order right now. Okay.
Rosanna, water polo. This is just a quick follow-up to Alec, right? Alec's question about telling your story. I attended this Storyline conference, and it really, really helped me. I was told that we have to look at ourselves like we're protagonists in a story, and we really, really want something. And basically, you want something, but you have to overcome conflict to get it. So what is your conflict? what do you want, and then there's going to be positive and negative turns in that story, and then the greater the conflict, usually the better the story. So that's really helped me, and hopefully that'll help you, Alec, and everyone else. Thanks.
Would you like to speak to that? Does that make sense to you guys? Is that type of idea? No, yeah, it's curious.
Well, the best marketing book ever written actually doesn't say the word marketing at once. It's called Story. It's by Ken McKee. He's a script writing prof at the University of Southern California. It's a big book. You guys travel a lot, so it'll be a great plane read. But it's exactly what you talked about. It's about writing scripts. If you can write a great movie script, you can tell your story. So.
I had man voice yesterday. I still do. Anyways, I have two questions. One is there's a lot of talking about when you're approaching a company XYZ, but maybe you could speak to like who you're supposed to be trying to make that contact with within a company when you're approaching them. And then the second comment or question I guess I have too with that is I've been fortunate to have a few sponsors that are like non-traditional, I'd say, for my sport. My name's Nicole, and I do athletics, the high jump. And a lot of the sponsors that I've had over my career have been by literally like bumping into somebody who's affiliated with the company or the actual CEO of the company and making like small talk, and that's how I've had those sponsorships. On the flip side, I've done the banging on the door like hundreds and hundreds of companies and having your press book and like submitting that and making the calls and trying to make that contact and having that door shut in my face, as well as having the comments like, well, you're not a nonprofit. I could sponsor United Way or some other kind of foundation, which is a write-off for me. Or, well, I've got whatever big athlete that they have for the company, and this is both at the local level as well as on the national level that I've done that, or from the span of that. So can you kind of speak to how do you get across that when you're not, like you're saying, like a top 3 in the world athlete, and if you're needing that support from whether it's a local level or if you're approaching a company that spans nationally, how do you get your foot in the door with those companies?
Okay, who wants to take a shot there?
What can I say? I ask you a question. When a company, let's say XYZ, you did your speech, whatever, and they said no, what did you do?
Well, I was discovered at McDonald's, for example,
yeah,
and that's how I got into track and field. Literally, a coach came in and asked me if I wanted to learn how to high jump, and I was almost 18. I approached a company like McDonald's, which I worked for 5 years at the busiest one in Canada, and the response was, well, we're sponsoring
snowboard.
I can't remember and it was all golf and tennis, or Canadian athletes in that area. So then I responded with, well, here's my story, and the response was, well, we have these athletes. So there's like no budging on that.
You were not talking with kids. I know that you're a good motivational speaker.
Yeah, I presented that too, my motivational, and I did like the breakdown in terms of, at that point I had like my needs, as well as there's like, say, platinum, gold, or bronze that you could, or silver that you could sponsor me with in that sense. But there was no biting and no interest.
And all the companies said no?
Yes.
Oh, we have a problem. What can I say? What can you say?
Well, I'd like to ask a question as well. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the sponsors that you've met? Because I think there's an important insight about networking there.
Well, for one, I'm sponsored with Visa, for example, and I've been with them for 6 years. I did a community charity thing at the time, and Visa was there, the VP was there, and I was just joking around with him. And then they created this program called Team Visa, and when they were launching it, they launched it with only 4 of us initially. And I think, for me, I think it was just because I was giving them a hard time about trying to do the high jump. I think that's how I got that sponsorship. Literally. And the fact that I was at like a at a community event. And then I've had like a sponsorship with Magna, which does like auto parts for Canada, or for, does auto parts. And it's one of like the biggest companies in Canada. And that again is something where I know the president on that sense. So it's been kind of in that sense that I've had my sponsorships. And it hasn't been from, here's my portfolio that I've put together and I've spent a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of resources putting this together. It's just like knowing, being at the right place at the right time.
Was the person from Visa, was it Gallant? Because he's quite short, so I can understand his, you found his pain. That's why he couldn't high jump. See, I told you, it's all about pain. You talk to a 5'3" guy, like, that's like stealing candy from a baby. But I think, Dan mentioned, this is not, it is not easy. It is a hard business. And I think that, the big challenge there is, again, at McDonald's, somebody not necessarily seeing the pain. And listen, big corporations, they're going to have that. So I guess I've never had the opportunity, well, I had the opportunity, but I sucked, to be an athlete on your level. But I can tell you the day I started my business, I sort of feel like you. Like, I was 28 years old, I quit my job, and I'm standing in my house with a little Mac laptop going, what did I do? I had a great paying job. I was talking to somebody last night who talked about, getting on a plane from, I think it was Kelowna to Montreal to start training, hoping to find a skating partner, and had a one-way ticket, right? Like, there's no coming back, and that's kind of where you're at. And so I would say Nicole's story to me is a perfect example of networking. Like, there are probably 20 to 30 marketing conferences that happen in this country that have sponsorship on their agenda, and probably another 100 to 200 that have marketing, and probably thousands of sales meetings. And while you don't want to give away your services for free, how many of you have approached one about speaking? And I would insist to you that if you're in an audience and you're hearing somebody speak, like the woman last night who scaled Everest, if she's speaking to a corporate audience, she's probably planting the seeds for future sponsors.
I would also say that it's probably the same in the corporate world. When you're trying to get sponsors for a golf tournament, it's all relationship based for the most part, right? So it's a tough world out there, but it's about the relationship and the stories. Being out there networking, because if you're not, your golf tournament isn't going to go either. So it's the same in the corporate world.
Yeah.
I guess like the point that I was just trying to make was like it seems really. I love what you guys are saying, but I think the reality is for me, if you're not like a niche name in sports in Canada, sometimes but that door is really hard to move to try and get that sponsorship. And yeah, if you're networking, you're able to be at the right place at the right time. You can get that sponsorship. But it's how do you move that mountain if you don't have that network legend? And also, ironically, one of the companies that I try to talk to, when they're like, "Oh, you do track and field? Well, how do I know you're not going to be Ben Johnson and be taking drugs or something?" We don't like to do individual sports. So there's a lot of other factors that feels like you're trying to move ahead, and I don't know, it's. Just how do you do that?
So if I was your coach and you were my athlete, I hear you telling me you can't reach the next height. So I'd turn around and say to you, how are you going to reach that next height? Because that's what we have to do. It's the same thing. You're performance-oriented people. This is no different.
I think what's really helping in the whole sport marketing stuff, too, is some of the studies that Mark's company has been working on, and it's educating corporate Canada. Is that, are the companies that are getting involved in sports sponsorship doing their research on who they should be involved with and learning about the athletes if they want to do an athlete program, and are they utilizing consultants out there to help them build the best package of athletes? You talk about Team Visa, and chances are you running into the VP, whether it was Gallant or whoever it was at Visa, if you hadn't made that impact on them and all of a sudden they just got a list of different athletes they had to pick from, they may not be doing the research that they need to do to figure out who they want to be involved with either. So it's up to you to sell you, and you sold yourself.
Sorry, everybody, please let's use the mic because it's being filmed and they can't pick up any audio. There are a few people left. We have 10 or so minutes, I think. And I'm going in an order. So I'm here, there, and going from that spot. Here you go.
Hi, I'm Erica. My sport's wakeboarding. My sport is very much industry oriented, and most of the sponsors within my sport are all pretty much similar, and it's really challenging, especially if I'm doing a lot of grassroots programs and developing programs to kind of burst outside that industry barrier. Do you have maybe like a 3-step process of how to like better cold call these companies?
Anyone?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying. Top 3 steps. One is that show yourself, come across as being very professional and being organized, and knowing them, doing your research so that you know who you're going in to talk to, what their company is all about, and what they and know what you want to get out of them. Those would be my 3 top steps.
The only thing I'd add to it is just this whole notion of community and of giving back. And I think if you were to do something in the communities that you tour that allowed underprivileged children or created some value for a community-based organization and all those relationships that those people have in those communities, I think that could be very powerful. You have a certain stature that you don't probably understand you have when you in these communities, and how do you leverage that? I think giving back is one way to do that.
Hi.
Oh. Hi.
Hi, Melanie Diving. My question might be very simple, but it's what is the very first step before contacting a company? I mean, I know that you said knock on the doors, definitely, but should you email? Like if you want to reach out to a lot of people, is email really that unprofessional, or phone calls, or do you really need to just show up with your portfolio? Because I feel like maybe if you just show up, they'll be like, well, do you make an appointment? Like what's really the first step?
To me, it will be to call, just to call the marketing department, tell a little bit about you, that you want to present them a project, and have an appointment. I mean, you guys, that part, I mean, to me, it's not hard. I mean, but a lot of time, like the athletes, they are nervous, they are scared to make the calls. You go at the marketing, you said, okay, this is your name, this is what you do. You'd like to sit down with them. You're not going to take a lot of the time. Give me an appointment.
Right. No, absolutely. But I think yesterday we were talking about the very first step. Once you get past that very first step, then you're already engaged. But the very first step, I feel like a lot of athletes, from when I've spoken to them, they don't even know how to even start. Like they don't have, even if they have a portfolio, they're standing there with it in their hand, like, okay, what do I do? Do I call an agent? Do I email? Email seems unprofessional. Seems very cold. But if I call, then that's great. I want to tell them all, just call. Call 100 people. Just call everybody.
See, I wouldn't do that. I'd say, what's that whole saying, 6 degrees of separation? I'd get a little a big piece of paper, put you in the middle, and then I'd list everybody you know or that your support system knows. And I'd create a little map of all those people and see what relationships and help they can be. I think that you kind of got to say, okay, here are the categories that I'll work in and won't work in. That's the first thing. So we're not doing cigarettes and we're not doing alcohol. But once you get beyond that, it's really about who you know and how you can leverage that network. And you'd be amazed if you sat down and put a piece of paper, put you in the middle, and put and I've done this somewhere at a seminar, just how powerful your network is. So I think personally that's where I'd start, because it's that relevancy to you that's the starting point, and then you got to build in, okay, well, am I relevant? How can I be relevant to this person or this company? But I'd start with who you know and who you can leverage through your network. And I want to say one thing, which is I'm curious because we've had all this discussion about you and the company, but we haven't had any discussion about your NSO and you and the company.
But we only have 20 minutes.
We only have 20 minutes, so that's a bit of a problem. But I think that's something that, some sports are better than others, okay, granted, but they are, in many respects, so I'm going to this could be bad here, but they are out there they are accountable for the high-performance program, winning medals, etc. So we have to work together, and we have to try and leverage the expertise of those entities to help you. And I think you're saying there is no expertise, but I'm not sure.
Can I just go back to the first step? Are you on LinkedIn?
Well, that's another one.
Are you on LinkedIn? Whoever asked that question.
Megan?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you know what LinkedIn is? Okay, so LinkedIn is Facebook for people who are over 12, even though we're all on Facebook, right?
We don't know how to use Facebook.
And,
we're on it, yeah.
and it's interesting to me, and this is going to sound bizarre, but to Dan's point, so people who want to sell to us, if you cold call me, I will not call you back, but I will have somebody in my office call you back, and they will immediately tell you, because people look at our website and they go, oh, you've got Coca-Cola, Nike, and Mattel, and Canadian Tire, can I get sponsorship? So we will we'll call you and tell you to send an email. If you go through LinkedIn, it's a social networking tool. The good news for you, because you're young, is this tool exists. You can find every VP of marketing, VP of sponsorship, director of sponsorship in the country on LinkedIn. And to Dan's point, I would take that little physical piece of paper, but I would then have your computer on and be surfing through LinkedIn. And then you can send messages through LinkedIn. Don't call me Mr., but, somebody sent me one yesterday. Dear Mr. Harrison, I'm starting a car racing team in the NASCAR Canadian Tire Series. I'm from Quebec. Do any of your clients sponsor NASCAR? As a person who's busy, that's great for me because I can forward that to somebody who can provide a reply. It's a social networking tool, so for some reason it's something less invasive. I don't know why. So in a year from now, I might change my point of view, but I would encourage every person in this room to be on LinkedIn before you go home.
The other thing that I would say too is that if you do that email and you get that meeting, always thank the company after that meeting for taking the meeting with you. And if it adds them onto your blog so they get updates and stuff like that, then they keep you front of mind. Whether they said yes to you from the beginning or not, it's just always keeping that link and that network going. And if I don't want to receive your blog, I'll unsubscribe later. But every once in a while, I get blogs and updates from people that I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's really neat to know. People that have asked to link in or however, but it's keeping your name front of mind with people, whether they've said yes or no, but always thank them for the meeting that you've had.
On? Oh, hi, Brenda from Sailing. I was just wondering how tenacious you should be on something. I know timing is everything, and I went to one sponsor before and asked them about sponsorship. They had actually a sponsorship program on their website, but when I went to them, they said, oh, we already sponsor another team sort of thing. So they already had, and it was before the Winter Olympics, and it was a winter sport that they were sponsoring. So I'm just wondering whether there's I imagine there's opportunities, but I was just asking what you thought about going back to some company a number of times or at certain periods of time just to see if they're a little bit more receptive. Because that might have been a few years ago. They might have a bigger sponsorship program now, or they might be a little bit more interested in moving into summer sports.
You would?
Go ahead.
I mean, if a company, again, this is going back to work. I mean, if a company said yes, no, we sponsor already somebody else, maybe you can offer something else. If the answer is no, I mean, go to a next company. I mean, the thing is, it's like we said before, it's a lot of work. I mean, a lot of times it's not going to be the first appointment that you're going to have, and you're going to have a sponsorship. I mean, it's going from doors to doors. And like I said, I mean, you have to believe in your story. The more you're going to be convinced, do your nice presentation. I mean, it's a lot of work. It's not easy, because a lot of time, I mean, myself, sometimes I get athletes, people come to us, say, okay, well, we're looking for an agent. I said, well, you don't need that. This is the advice I can give you guys. You have to go sell yourself. I mean, a lot of time at some point in your career, like you don't need the agent. You don't need someone else. You know yourself better than anybody. You just have to go from those door to doors. I mean, I started. I was knocking on doors on restaurant locally. I'm like, okay, well, this is my neighborhood. Knock on door. This restaurant, oh, we never sponsor. Well, maybe it's going to be your first time. And I'd be proud to represent your company. Yeah, the restaurant in my, I started like that. I mean, I had $1,000.
I think
That's-
just make sure when you go back, you demonstrated to them that you'd learned something about their business. So, you know, the first conversation you had when they said, okay, we're sponsoring a winter sport. So when you're in those, you got to say, okay, well, when is the time that you look at sponsorship? And what is your strategy around sponsorship? Because there may be a fit, and you should cut your losses and go. I mean, if they say, well, we're only in focus, we're XYZ company, and this is what our brand stands for, and we're interested in winter sport, well, you're out of luck, so move on. I think you got to know when to move on, too.
And certain companies do have different sales cycles, right? Some will be planning now for programs that they'll put together next June, and some will be planning now for stuff they'll put together January of 2012. So it really depends on the size of the company and where they're at in their whole planning cycle as to how often you go back. So I think, you know, if you're looking at a national company that you know they've been involved in sports sponsorship in the past, then, you know, if they were involved with the winter team, then I would wait till 2-3 months after sort of that quadrennial finishes before I would go in and approach them again if they're still interested in continuing in sport, and learn, like Dan said, learn what you think they want and research them a little bit before you go back.
We have time for one more question, and then it'll be a break. But I think everyone's hanging out for another hour and a half or so after our break. So keep your questions, because you'll hopefully have a chance to get them heard.
Hi, it's Georgina Curling. I think the root of the problem really for athletes is we're training many, many hours, and we're trained to do our sport. We're not trained to market ourselves. And it's difficult to ask for money. You know, I think it's really difficult for most of us to walk into a door and ask for money. And so, you know, the root of, you know, finding out how you can help their company and not talking about money is a lot more comfortable probably for most athletes, and then see where that kind of takes you, because the bottom line is, you know, most of us aren't trained in marketing and aren't in sales, and so it's a difficult procedure. And that's why when people ask, you know, when should we have an agent, we want to have an agent right away, because you know the market. You know how to market somebody. We, on the other hand, are athletes training, a lot of them, and my sport's different, but training hours on end. And so to have to do that on top of what they're already doing is, and if it's life or death, it's easy. You walk in and you say, I have $1,000 in my pocket, and I need to go to the States to train. But when it's not life and death, and we're pretty humble people, it's difficult. So that's my comment on that, and you can make your comments on that. The other question I wanted to go back to was when you talked about the RBC program, the Rona program, and you said they're not aligned. And I've been involved in both of those programs, and I find it very difficult because the COC, God bless them, but they're involved, and I just think those programs aren't being marketed by the right people. And Michelle, you know this, it's difficult, you know, when you're one person in an organization trying to run a 100 athlete program. So they're not getting their bang for their buck, and I think it's a great program for the athletes. Would probably say, wow, you know, Rona gives me $8,000 a year, and I do maybe one appearance, if that. So it's, I just wondered what your thoughts were on that and why you said they weren't aligned.
Well, don't get me wrong, they're all great programs, and they're all helping kids. And they're great for the athletes. I guess my point is we're competing against nations like Great Britain and Australia, around the world, and America, and they've got limited resources. So every dollar that we take out of the marketplace has to be strategic and has to help us to our end goal. So I think aligning them to say, what I'd love to see aligning them is we have this long-term development model, and I'd love to find a way, and maybe this is just a pipe dream, to align some of these grant programs so that we cover the needs of high-performance athletes across Canada in some way, that we're not creating programs that aren't going to take certain athletes over the top, and we've got some development athlete needs, and we've got some elite athlete needs. We've got OTP doing a certain piece of the job. We've got the NSOs doing a certain piece of the role. So how can we align them better? That's my only point, is I don't think they're terribly well aligned at this point in time.
You need the mic.
You need the mic, or else you're not being heard.
Beach volleyball. I brought it up yesterday when they were talking with Sport Canada, and I think the difference is when we talk about sports within NHL, football, these other sports, they're driven by businesses, and we're talking about government agencies that run our sports, and they're not businesses, and they don't run like businesses, and that's got to be a fundamental effect when we try to create and market athletes, because they get money, they just need to spend money. You listen to Sport Canada talk yesterday, they have $200 million. And this is all we have. But it's not about generating revenue for them. It's just about spending the money and cutting back. It's always about cutting back. It's never about generating programs that generate money. When you talk to MLS, they're all about creating revenue streams. And we are constantly sold as this charity group as athletes, instead of being a viable product that, like an NHL and I think the fundamental shift has to come from the leadership. And, again, we're so dependent on government subsidies that we have to find another way to market ourselves at a different level, besides from the government money, because it's always going to be that government money is just going to, it's never about creating more money. It's always about.
It's going to be a finite pot of money, and we'll have to deal with that pot of money. I'm just saying, if there's strategic way to align the other support for amateur sport nationally, that would be a good thing, because currently they're only going to do X, and we've got to fill the void with Y. And how do we maximize that pool of money that we can create together? And I think there's got to be some alignment, and we can't. I know you had a challenging conversation yesterday with AEP, talking about aligning to OTP and how they wanted to top up some of the top 8 in the world, and then some of you are saying, well, there are these other programs, and so they're the guys that don't need it necessarily, because there are other programs, and how do we fill the void? And I think it's working to create alignment in how those programs support the national strategy of OTP is what we've got to do now. So maybe RONA shouldn't be. Maybe they should be focused on development athletes, and maybe X sponsors are focused on the high performance athletes, and maybe there's a continuum, and we create a I'll just, I know we're over time, but I thought was interesting is that in Australia, when Australia got the Olympics, and they decided, okay, well, we're gonna win the Olympics, we're gonna be a power. It was actually the Prime Minister of Australia that went to Telstra and said, okay, I need you. You got to take on the swim team here. And they put in big bucks into that program. So there was some alignment between the national interests. So the government said, I've got this pot of money, and they helped align others to fill that void so that they could be a power.
I think along what Aaron's sort of getting at too is this might be the alignment with your NSOs, is utilizing the pool of athletes in the sport of swimming and the National Sport Federation, and having them bring in the sponsors. But if they're going to use key marquee athletes to help market or build that program for that sponsor, then what the education comes from is the National Sport Federation has to compensate that athlete as well for their name, likeness, image, profile, everything that you've worked hard to establish personally. But there are ways to align. If you know that your National Sport Federation is going out there and they're talking to an automotive category company, go to them and say, hey, you know what? I'm top of my sport, or I really see myself aligned with this, and let's build this package together. And you might get something out of it, you might not. We've been trying to do that with a couple of athletes. We haven't had the greatest success in that either, but it's going in and educating those sports and educating, because everyone will win that way, and you've got the pool of 35,000 members, that's a benefit to some of those companies because they're in communities across the country. We talk about community involvement, and you might get that one company that all they really want is access to people in every community in the country or a majority of the country. And you can't provide that to them as an individual. But if you go on behalf of your sport, you can't. And there might be some synergies there, but I'm not saying it's going to be easy because it's not. So.
Hello. I think it's time for a break. We're about 10 minutes over time. Obviously, it's been fantastic. I think everyone's coming back right after the break for ready-to-use tools. And again, Dan, I think you're facilitating everything, right?
No, I'm not.
Oh, no?
I'll be there.
Okay. Okay. Anyway, break time. Be back at 10:30.